Welcome to Productive Joy with Dr. Christy, where fun meets action.
Hi, friends. Welcome to Productive Joy. I am having so much fun, and I hope that you are having just as much fun learning from people who have walked in different shoes than you have and are learning how to do this whole life thing a little differently so that together we make a pretty cool team. And today was no exception. And so yesterday I had the opportunity to talk to Dan Doerksen. Dan is from Canada, and he and I met in a psychological safety class. So I'm certified in psychological safety, as is he, and we took our courses together. So there were 4 different times that we were in the same virtual space. And he was just a very thoughtful person as we would get grouped together. And so he then reached out to me to see if I wanted, or he was looking for a coach, and I coached him. And then we just kind of maintained a LinkedIn acquaintance, right? But as I was thinking about guests for this podcast, he came to mind because he just has a bright way of looking at things. And by bright, I mean sunny, light. It's not that he makes light of things, that he finds light in things. And I really am drawn towards those kinds of humans. As you can imagine, I tend to be a pretty shiny person myself. And I like when I can feel enlightened by others. So Dan did that for me. And in this podcast, he's going to do it for you too. And what we talked about quite a bit, we've talked about lots of things, but what I think is most impactful is that work was actually designed to be a good thing. It is meant to be productive. It is meant to be a happy place. But somewhere along the line, we turned it into a job. And I'm putting job in air quotes if you're not watching. And so as we turned work into a job, we stopped allowing it to be fulfilling and fun. Now, some of us work for jobs or organizations where we're very fulfilled. We love what we do. We get to go to work every day instead of we have to go to work every day. But there are an awful lot of us who feel a little more stuck, and we feel a little more like we have to do this, not we get to do this. And that is a really difficult space to be in. His encouragement to all of us would be that you don't have to stay there, that you can think things through differently and you can look for things that are fulfilling. So, work is actually inherently good, and something made it bad versus work is really bad. Now I have to make it good. And I really appreciate that juxtaposition. In this podcast, we talked about the difference between leaders and managers and how you kind of, you have to be both, but that those people managers, the people who manage others, are really the linchpins to whether or not an organization is going to be successful. And it's not because they're the most productive, it's because they're the ones that allow others to find their own productivity. That's pretty cool. And the more we talked, the more aligned I felt to the fact that, we can make work fun and we can create spaces where people enjoy doing what they're doing. So I'm going to just kind of share, it's vulnerable, right? I have always loved what I do. I started out as a teacher. I wanted to teach high school. That was my first job out of college. I was 21, I guess. Yeah, I was 21. I had a student who was 22, even though I was teaching at a high school. And I knew that was where I was meant to be. I loved it. I loved everything about it. That does not mean I didn't cry frequently, but I loved it because it was what I was supposed to be doing. And then you fast forward a few years, and I went from teaching in a classroom to teaching adults how to teach, and then really have spent the bulk of my career doing just that. And I've always made it a point to enjoy what I do. Doesn't mean that I was always the best equipped or the one that was supposed to be really great at the thing. I just made a choice to enjoy it. And there were days, of course, where I hated everything about what I was doing. But for the most part, I have had jobs that I really enjoy. I also have friends who can't say that even today, right? Whether it's, I'm doing this because I have to, or this is a means to an end, or I, must do this thing. uh, I just chose not to look at it that way. And I'm not saying that you can shift your entire experience just by making that mindset shift, but I do think that you can influence it considerably. And so I chose to influence my mindset by shifting my mindset to one of joy. this is something I get to do. This is something that I'm going to choose to enjoy. And then I continue to better myself in that space. I don't know what your current role is. I don't know if you love it or hate it, but I do know that you have some choices and you get to decide how you're impacted by the choices that you make. And I want to encourage you that you can actually be really happy at work. And no, work isn't designed to make us happy, but we spend over half of our lives there. Lives. That sounded weird. Half of your life there, and you get to decide if you enjoy it or not. So, why would you want to spend over half of your life, your waking hours, doing something that you hate? No, I don't think that's necessary. Instead, I'm going to encourage you today to do some introspection. Do you like what you do? Do you think you want to like what you do? If you don't already like what you do, what's stopping you and how can you make it better? I think that's a pretty good introspection to make on this lovely Wednesday. And I do hope that you will choose to make it because you do have a whole lot more choice in that mindset than you realize. So, something else cool that Dan didn't mention is that he's writing a book. It's coming out in mid 2025. And the book is going to be around the essential practices of good managers. So, if you listened to the episode, you heard that his definition of a manager really is somebody who is creating the systems to care for the people. And I think that's a great definition of a manager. I think a great leader then also is going somewhere that's worth following. So, to the two together is what makes a successful manager. But in this book, he did mention in the podcast that like 80% of people who hold a people managerial position have zero training in that space. They were just good at what they did and then they got promoted. Well, he is writing this book to give those practical tips and tricks so that people can be great managers. How great is that? Thanks, Dan. I think that's a pretty good thing. So, today on Productive Joy, I am hopeful that you're walking away with the encouragement that you can actually influence how you're feeling for 50% of your life at that job and that you could find some really positive things to sink your teeth into. And you get to do that. So choose to do that, whatever that might be. It might mean that you start volunteering somewhere. It might mean that you shift your career. It might mean that you change nothing because you love what you do. But I want to encourage you to recognize you have influence.